Hi, Frank. We ready, Dave, to go? Okay. All right. Good evening, everyone. Welcome back. We are really into the meat of it now on Kalu Rinpoche's book, Profound Buddhism from Hinayana to Vajrayana. Page 179. The chapter is called Mahamudra 3. And yeah, this will get kind of heavy, but we'll go slow. And also ask any questions as we're going along tonight, because again, this is very profound stuff. But the introduction says the techniques of superior vision, in Sanskrit vipassana, Tibetan laktong. Techniques of superior vision are varied. A beginner will use, for example, methods called external and internal superior vision. They are concerned with the absence of forms, the absence of sensations, the absence of mind, and the absence of phenomenon. However, in the Vajrayana, superior vision, vipassana, and Mahamudra are the same, and only one thing: the recognition of the genuine mode of being of the mind. From this perspective, superior vision or Mahamudra is the same thing. So that is vipassana, the same thing. In our retreat last weekend, the book we were using, Calm and Clear. Clear is referring to vipassana, superior seeing. All right, so Kalu Rinpoche starts out from basis to result. The meditation in Mahamudra is made of 3 steps. Recognizing the mode of being of our mind is the foundation Mahamudra. Meditating without interruption in this state of recognition is the path Mahamudra. Finally, covering what is called the 12 steps of the 4 paths in the Kalu school. Kagyupta school. Kagyu, that's us. That is the inferior, mediocre, and superior levels of concentration, simplicity, one taste, and non-meditation, one reaches Buddhahood, the result Mahamudra. So we have foundation, path, and result. You see this terminology in Dzogchen also. Foundation, path, and result. And these four levels that they're talking about, inferior, mediocre, and superior levels, three classifications of the four levels of concentration, simplicity, one taste, and non-meditation. I believe those come from teachings by Gampopa, which he will probably touch on. All right, so again, the foundation, the path, and the result, the basic framework. If the recognition of the mode of being is not accomplished first, no foundation, no point of beginning will be provided for the path. Without a path to cover, it is also impossible to attain the goal. So the first of these three steps, that is the recognition of the foundation, the nature of the mind, is essential. And this is why it's, considered a high teaching. Because what are you practicing on this level of Mahamudra? If there isn't the recognition, there's the recognition of the nature, the path is abiding in that nature and then doing further practices. And of course, the result is Mahamudra. Dissipating the haze. Before approaching Mahamudra, it is normally necessary to accomplish the preliminary practices that make meditation easy because they purify the practitioner. All right, so this is referring to the Nundro. And again, the Nundro literally means go before. These are the inner and outer Nundro. The outer Nundro is the four thoughts that turn the mind to Dharma. These are so important. And even if one's situation doesn't allow you to complete the Nundro teachings, he'll say something about that too, I believe. Still, the basic graduated presentation of it is so helpful. And you just don't see this. I mean, it's like, as Americans, I kind of feel like we're all in a big hurry, and what's called Western Buddhism often isn't exposed to these at all. And so it's kind of hard. So you have the four thoughts that turn the mind to Dharma. And then what happens? Well, there's taking refuge. Many people want to practice without refuge. They haven't done the four thoughts, obviously, because if you've done the four thoughts, thoroughly ingested them, understood them, realized them, their conceptual teachings, you naturally are led to refuge. Then with the refuge, obviously there's bodhicitta, then the purification of Vajrasattva, then the great accumulation of merit, doing the mandala offerings, and so it goes on. So there's the Nundro practices. But the order, just even the basic outline of the teachings, the organization of the teachings, is a tremendous gift that I believe the Tibetans gave to us. Because in India, they had this, in Tibet rather, they had this challenge of how do you transmit this huge body of teachings and traditions, Indian Buddhism, 1,500 years after the Buddha passed away. I mean, it's just a tremendous amount of material. And I mean, for us even today, even with our literacy and everything, I mean, we feel sort of stunned by the vastness of this. And we only have what's been preserved. So he'll say more about the Nundro. But they purify the practitioner. That's the thing, the essence of the Nundro is that it's removing, by doing it, you're removing obstacles. For instance, when you're taking refuge with 100,000 prostrations. And then as you get up from each prostration, you're taking the bodhicitta vow. I mean, this is like a profound kind of training, and all the difficulties that come up with it, physical and mental and whatever, this is all purification. And of course, it's cleaning out the foundation of the house, which allows you to meditate more effectively. So, When the sky is hazy or cloudy, it is not possible to see the sun, although the sun is present. The more the haze and the clouds dissipate, the more one has a clear view of the sun. In the same way, because of the preliminary practices, the more we purify faults and veils and accumulate merit, the easier Mahamudra becomes. So after the preparatory phase, the Lama begins to give instructions, first expounding the methods of mental calming, again in Sanskrit that's shamatha, in Tibetan shine, first expounding the methods of mental calming, which allow some mastery of the capability of keeping the mind at rest. When shine begins to bear fruit, thoughts and conflicting emotions dissipate, and the mind is capable of remaining well-focused. Then the Lama talks with the disciple, bringing the meditator to discover the nature of his or her mind. The Lama asks questions such as, where does a thought come from? Where does it stay? Where does it disappear? The Lama questions what is called origin, location, disappearance. Again, the Lama asks the disciple, what is the nature of the mind at rest? What is the nature of the mind in movement? What is the nature of the mind aware of both rest and movement? Like this, the examination of the rest, movement, consciousness is done. The disciple meditates on these questions and begins to bring answers to the Lama, who corrects and leads the disciple to a personal and correct conclusion. So this traditionally was done, like in a community. The classic example is Milarepa and the people who were surrounded around him. You would have this central figure of the Lama, and they're doing various things, but everyone had contact with the Lama in that way, in like personal interview, and the Lama would ask some question. But then rather than maybe if there was some sort of unusual person who had an easy realization, he'd be working with the Lama right like that, he or she. But normally you go back into your cave. They'd send him up the mountain in a cave and would meditate on this question until they felt that they had some sort of understanding. Then they would come back to the Lama. So you had, a dozen people maybe doing like this, and with the great teachers more. But this continual, ongoing practice, this is what they were doing. And of course, that's very wonderful and very rare because, obviously they had to be supported. And have the conditions that allowed for this and the understanding, like the support of a community or culture. So Kalu Rinpoche, after describing this now, he continues. He says, we do not have the time necessary for such a progressive approach now. The Dharma is vast, but human beings are engaged in many activities, much work, many distractions, and much laziness, so there is little time left for the practice. In a certain way, this lack of time could lead you to think that the realization of Mahamudra is closed to you. However, it is said that the more difficult the situation from a spiritual point of view, the more materialistic the era in which we live, then the more powerful is the blessing of so profound a teaching as Mahamudra. Therefore, I believe that sincere personal practice can lead you to realization. What an incredibly powerful and positive statement. Because it's really true. It's very easy for the mind. You can see how our mind works. We immediately go to, then nothing can work, or nothing can work for me, or whatever. But of course, that's not the situation. Because again, we're always dealing with the nature of our mind. It doesn't go anywhere. And all of us have inherited the situation, results, the mind of our past exertions. So we don't know how thick or thin the veils are, but eventually they're just illusory anyway. So, that potential is always there. And it's also said that the Bodhisattva never gives in to discouragement. Because if you look at things in a certain kind of material way, all these individual sentient beings. Oh, it's overwhelming. But of course, it's not a false teaching. All right. This next section is called a gem lost in the night. If one has no idea of the mode of being of the mind, the practice of Mahamudra is impossible. Suppose that you have lost a small precious stone during the night in a place without light. Your eyes cannot see it, and you grope around with your hand to find it. The chances of finding it are slim. If someone provides some light, the chances of locating it are greater. Meditating without knowledge what mind is similar to searching for a small object in the middle of the night with no light. You must understand that the mind is emptiness, clarity, and non-obstruction, and see how its fundamental purity is altered by the four veils of ignorance, latent conditioning, conflicting emotions, and karma. And we talked about those earlier in the earlier chapters. But this gives you a sense, too, of why all these practices. It seems, at least to me, so overwhelming. People, it's like I said, in our culture, we're always looking for the active ingredient. We don't want to chew cocoa leaves. We want cocaine. We don't want to chew willow bark. We want aspirin. That's sort of what we do. But in that, and all of that is fine, but if there's this kind of impatience and rush trying to make things happen, it's actually working against us. So this is so important. Meditating without knowing what mind is similar to searching for a small object in the middle of the night with no light. In other words, there has to be knowledge. It's like they say, study and practice. In a lot of Western Buddhism, they're always talking about practice, but they're not talking so much about knowing what they're doing. And of course, this is a mistake. For one thing, our knowledge is extremely helpful because it supports confidence. It supports faith. And in the end, it's the faith that carries us through. But you have to have faith in an object, and then eventually an objectless faith, which is objectless compassion. But that's, obviously a developed state. Okay. So that was a gem lost in the night. Next, he's transforming hell into a headache. Not covered by the four veils, the mind is called the potential of primordial awareness. Covered by the veils, it is the potential of individualized consciousness. So, the potential of primordial awareness is the mind. Covered by the veils, it's the potential of individualized consciousness. Among the beings in samsara, the potential of primordial awareness has little power to surface because the veils are thick. From time to time, only as chance combination of circumstances allows, the potential of primordial awareness is expressed under the form of faith, compassion, altruism, and so on. From there proceeds a white karma, engendering rebirth in superior realms. Because of the rarity of this white karma, few beings reach superior worlds. Black karma, on the other hand, is usual, and the three inferior realms accommodate more beings. So it's said, yes, that in the lower realms, the worse it is, the more beings are there. As you go up, the number of beings is less and less and less. Fortunately, there are many methods to purify oneself of these veils. In Mahayana, for example, the mind of awakening, bodhicitta, is looked upon as a powerful agent for purification. Supposing that our karmic reservoir prepares us after this life for a certain rebirth in hell, it is said that a powerful development of the mind of awakening, bodhicitta, will transform that which should have produced the immense suffering of hell into a simple headache in this lifetime. it takes faith to believe in these kinds of things. But one of the benefits of practice is that faith is arisen, it appears, then it's stabilized, and then it gets gradually stronger and stronger and stronger. Because why? Because all of these things that we practice, all of these relative and conceptual teachings, the whole 84,000 masses of them, are our true nature, but manifesting, appearing in a way that we can see it, even with our dualistic mind, even with our deluded mind. We're not seeing it with a deluded mind, but with this whole limited understanding that we have, it's still there. And so it's expressed to us in a way that is valid. So the compassion, the loving kindness and compassion, the spontaneous joy, the great impartiality, all those are in one sense worldly states, but they're the peak of worldly existence. And because we put, bodhicitta and the realization of the nature of mind completely suffused into that, it is our true nature functioning. That's how we see it. They tell this story about, water, any kind of substance, to show you the power of the samskaras, the conditioning that our mind has, I like to call it the baggage that we carry around with us. We have a perception, but then that perception is colored and formed by our past experiences and our sort of inherent conditioning that we don't even recognize, but there it is, and then it appears as real. So it's said that human beings, see water as water, as something to drink and clean with. The animals, though, like the fish, they see water as the fish anyway, as their home. And it's said that the hungry ghosts, tormented by greed, they perceive water as pus. And then the hellish beings, they perceive it as molten copper. But then when you go to the God realms, they perceive it as nectar. So we're always, like purifying our perception of these things, purifying our mind, so these things actually appear to us in this way. That's why in the sadhanas, for instance, we're making offerings of nectar because we can use ordinary water in the shrine, but we imagine it as nectar, and that imagining is not false. It seems imagining because we're stuck in this place where we see our perceptions as being absolutely real, but of course they're not. And with the mind, it can change, and we can experience these kinds of things in our meditation in other ways where the reality shifts. I mean, for instance, just in a very simple way, you can be sitting in meditation and just be fighting sleep, and everything is just like unbelievably difficult, and the body is just aching, and then all of a sudden something can turn. I mean, someone hits a symbol, or the Lama says something, or there's some sort of movement of the mind. And it can happen in a whole group where there's like a whole group energy. Suddenly there's a huge bolt of energy going through this group of people. And suddenly, where did the pain go? It's gone. And suddenly you're alert and awake. And so what seemed to be, this is the state that I'm in, is obviously transient. But we kind of wallow in it, and we give it more weight than it really has, because it's hard in the midst of us to say, well, this could just go away and this is just my mind. We don't see the nature of the mind. We're always dealing with the appearances. So this is very skillful, all these many methods to purify ourselves of these veils. And this is, I think, such an obstacle for us culturally, basically, not so much the people here, like practicing as we do, but ordinary people walk in the door. People can have such resistance to prostration, such resistance to lighting a stick of incense, such resistance to prayers, such resistance to making these verbal aspirations and all of this. Because, whatever their past associations are, maybe something with blind faith, they actually are pretty sensible to have some hesitations like that. But if they understood what we were doing, it's all about understanding, then suddenly it's different. It's different. If they understand that Buddhism is always the finger pointing at the moon, then all of these things don't have that kind of weight, but they have a tremendous power of purification. Okay. This next little section he calls acts create imprints. We should understand the role of this veil of karma. So the outermost veil, again, is karma, which has been produced by our afflictive emotions. We should understand the role of this veil of karma. All acts that we accomplish, whatever their importance in nature, whether they are positive, such as protecting life, giving, and so on, or negative, such as killing or stealing, leave an imprint in the potential of individualized consciousness. Endowed with a dynamic power, this imprint or seed ripens when conditions and related factors are gathered. Finally, this imprint results in a situation we experience. There's a footnote here. Let me just read the footnote. The relationship is obvious between the unconscious described by psychoanalysis and the potential of individualized consciousness. However, the potential of individualized consciousness is conceived in a larger way than the former. So it's more than psychoanalysis. The virtualities contained in the potential of individualized consciousness informed by our acts, not only by psychological trauma, are carried from one existence to another. They condition not only our reaction to the environment, but circumstances and even the events of our existence. Okay, so maybe a word on this. He says we should understand this is the role of the veil of karma. All acts, whatever their importance in nature, whether they are positive, such as protecting life, giving, and so on, or negative, such as killing or stealing, leave an imprint in the potential of individualized consciousness. Endowed with a dynamic power, this imprint or seed ripens when conditions and related factors are gathered. And finally, this imprint results in a situation we experience. So yeah, this is rather remarkable. But I think important here to understand is the dynamism of the mind. These things we do are not just dead acts that somehow that's all there is to it. No, they have this potential because they don't go away. Our mind is not subject to birth and death. There's this whole display of birth and death going on, but in a sense, there's nothing that's being born and there's nothing that's dying. We don't have that kind of understanding. But the things that we do with our individualized potential of, what did he call it, consciousness, they're dynamic. And so they give an example in the Yogacara school. So again, the teachings that we've been given here are Madhyamaka, the great middle way. But there is said to be a school that existed in India and still exists in Tibet, I'm told, at least before the Chinese, of the Yogacarya, the path of yoga, the path of unity. And they had a very wonderful, it pops up in the teaching sometimes, you see references to it in one of the sadhanas, especially in Dzogchen, but it works here for Mahamudra too, of the 8 levels of consciousness. That's the teaching that it more details what he's speaking about here. So we have first, our 5 levels of eye, ear, nose, body, tongue, mind, body. So we have all the sensual consciousness of, eye, ear, nose, tongue, body, feeling. And it's said that these are like sort of a direct experience. You see something directly, you feel something directly, you hear something directly. So you have that experience happening. Then our 6th level of consciousness is our conceptual mind. And that's a reactive function. It takes the data, you might say, of these sensual of our five senses, and sort of, you might say, reacts to them or plays with them or whatever. You get a smell, but it's a thinking mind that says, oh, I don't like that smell. So there's a reactive, a secondary level kind of there. But then there's said to be this, and these are the seeds are produced. So we have something there. We have this seed of good or bad or whatever it was, whatever we did, exists. Then there is this seventh level and eighth level. The eighth level is called the alaya, jumping to the end, the storehouse consciousness. So alaya, again, we already know the word for Himalaya. Him is snow. So the storehouse of the snow, the abode of the snow is what Himalaya means. So we have this alaya level, where these seeds are stored. The seventh level of consciousness is like a conveyor belt. It's moving the seeds, these impressions, these mental nuggets, you might say, from our awaked experience into unconsciousness, into the alaya, storehouse consciousness. So they're all there. Everything you've done, good, past, it's like these little potentialities are just sitting there, these little, alien eggs waiting to hatch. And then the seventh consciousness, has transmitted them all up there, but the seventh consciousness can also transmit them back into our waking life when the conditions are right. So you have some seed there, this potential for what? For a big explosion of anger, for instance, or the potential for a moment of pure devotion. That's all there. And when the conditions are right, the secondary conditions, these things can manifest. And one of the mistakes that human beings make because of our limited vision is that we're always running around like attacking the conditions. But those are just the secondary things. The cause is that seed. That cause is that seed that we created. Although we don't see how we created it, we don't see when we created it. But all we know is this moment when suddenly, you have this little seed for anger, and then someone who you hate walks in the room, and you have all those perceptions, and bingo, and the person that you hate does something that seems disrespectful to you, and of course you have all these conditions of my ego and all these, and it all just comes together, and you got a blow up. So it's very kind of detailed, but that's what he's referring to here, this veil of karma, and we're just running around in our karma again and again and again. But again, the dynamic power, that's the key thing. So that's the power of all of this. That's why we're all kind of vulnerable, because we're not sitting around in some sort of turtle shell, that nothing's going to happen to me if I just sit here and just keep my mouth shut. Instead, you've got these dynamic seeds in the mind that can erupt at any moment, sprout at any moment, but that dynamic energy is also the way out. And this is what's so completely, again, culturally, we tend not to have faith in all these different methods that we see in a Dharma center, and all the different things that, like, I don't know, liberation by taste, the Lama comes around and is, pouring some strange liquid on your head. All these things seem like, is this just blind faith? Well, no, it's not. All right.
The good karma also.
Yes.
So over that same amount of time, we could be doing more good than bad.
Yeah. So Keen's just asking, the good karma ripens too. Absolutely. Absolutely. And there's this, teaching Lama Tarchin would give. I think it didn't start with him. It's a classic one they see. It talked about some Lama a person who was practicing, and he had a store of white rocks and black rocks. And every time in his meditation, when he would have a negative thought arise, he put a little black rock in the pile. And when he had a positive thought, he put a white rock. And of course, at the end of the day, he just had a huge number of black rocks. But he kept going. And over time, they evened out, and then finally the white rocks predominating. And, that's an illustration, but you can see that with Rinpoche. I mean, it's just amazing. It's just like it's all positive. I've seen them get bad news. It's not a denial. It's not a suppression. It's like complete engagement and love of human beings. It's just, I believe infinitely more power than we give it credence to with our current level of understanding, but we can experience it. All right. So the potential of individualized consciousness is the basis of the process of karma. As long as our mind functions in this mode, acts necessarily continue to engender karmic results for us. The Buddha said that once an act is accomplished, even if 100 kalpas, 100 eons have to pass, its consequences will necessarily happen when the circumstances allow it. So we're all in a very vulnerable state. But also the teaching, again, these four thoughts that turn the mind to Dharma. The very first one is the realization of the precious human life. And you see how important that is, because you realize when you start learning these things, and it can be like scary for people, or just seems like overwhelming, like, oh, there's no way I can come out from underneath all of this stuff. And then especially as you start to have more awareness in your life and you see how much laziness is there and how much chasing distractions and everything. But the teaching of the precious human life, you cannot attain a precious human life except for this tremendous store of merit that we have. We've done so much merit, virtue, that we're born in kind of a situation which is the perfect state from which to progress. So, we can look at the God realms and they seem superior to us, and they are, in that the positives way outweigh the negatives. So everything is just like hunky-dory, sweet, wonderful. But they don't have enough recognition of the negative to motivate them to improve themselves. Whereas as human beings, we do. We have a taste of this Buddha nature. You can see in the love of a child, in the beauty of a sunset. We get these feelings that there's something that's more than just my little ego wanting stuff. And yet we have enough suffering that we're motivated to do about it, because we see the imperfection around us all the time.
What is that story again?
About the precious human life?
Yeah, something about the turtle.
Oh, yeah. Keen's referring to this story out of the sutras of talking about the rarity of the precious human life. It said, if you can imagine, the Buddha told the story, if you imagine the earth as completely covered by ocean, and very deep ocean, and in that ocean there's one giant turtle, and it's swimming around, and it comes up to the surface only once in a century. Also on the ocean is like a life preserver, a life raft, one of those round ones, and that's being tossed around because the surface is just like our mind, is completely agitated. It's like a typhoon's going on, so all these waves, and that thing's being tossed around. One turtle, one life preserver. The chance of being born as a human being, precious human birth, is the same odds as that turtle coming up once in a century and putting his head through the life preserver. So it's very daunting. And when you understand that, the idea of the rarity of this, of our situation, and therefore the preciousness of it is really, it really impressed. One Lama said that, traditionally no one has the time for it anymore, but traditionally, to understand the importance, you would spend 6 months meditating on the four thoughts that turn the mind to Dharma, because they're that important. And there's one book, Torch of Certainty, I think, which is about Nundro, and there are 3 different lamas commenting on it. I think Kalu Rinpoche is one of them. Dejung Rinpoche, a great Sakya scholar who's passed away, one of them, and then Chogyam Trungpa. And I think it was Trungpa who said that, the greatness of these 4 thoughts too is that if you're having difficulty with one of the thoughts, you just move back to the previous one, and you just keep working on it until you've worked out all your doubts. So there's a very, accessible path that we can work on, and there's less like banging around in the dark, which is, again, valuable and helpful. Okay. Yeah, so Buddha said that once an act is accomplished, even if 100 kalpas have to pass, its consequences will necessarily happen when the circumstances allow it. All right. So, karma and memory. Again, I should say on this footnote, looking at the footnote again, the relationship, there is a relationship, obviously, to, the psychoanalysis and working on the unconscious mind, and with this idea of this individualized, potential consciousness, the potential of individualized consciousness, excuse me. But the difference is, again, is that the latter one is deathless. This is what's so mind-boggling, but also so powerful and encouraging, is that this goes from lifetime to lifetime. So it's not just, the psychological difficulties and challenges of one lifetime, but there's a real chance for potential and change. Okay, karma and memory. Some people are hardly convinced of this law of karma and even reject it outright. They think to themselves, the Buddha and the Lamas talk a lot about it, but no one has ever seen it. It is not certain that this law of karma has an existence other than the words that describe it. It is obvious that karma is invisible. It takes place in the potential of individualized consciousness, which is none other than the mind. The mind is immaterial and invisible. Therefore, karma is immaterial and invisible. The fact that one does not see it is not proof of its non-existence. Perhaps you have studied for 15 years. Can you see where the immense quantity of information was stored during these years? If it were something tangible, a place would be necessary for storing it, such as your house, your chest, or some other location. It is clear that this is not so. Not finding a physical location for the memory of your studies cannot lead to a belief that this memory does not exist. When we need data that we have studied, they return to our mind, and we can use them. They did not come from a place. Nevertheless, they reappear. Karma follows a process analogous to that of memory. Acts have been recorded in the potential of individualized consciousness during our past lives. Although this potential does not consist of a reservoir in the physical sense, their effects reappear when the circumstances, that is, the association of many factors, are favorable to them. Yeah. You're getting a sense already here, though, of Mahamudra, its directness, because what I gave you the example out of the Yogacarya, those 8 levels of 8 levels of mind, 8 levels of consciousness. That you have that kind of structure. But here, what he's doing, he didn't get into that at all. He's just talking about the potential of individualized consciousness. That's our true nature manifesting in this apparent way, this way that we can, touch it and feel it right now, even being unrealized. So, there's just one concept there, you might say, in the Mahamudra, and not 8 different concepts. Yeah, it's pretty amazing. Okay, steps of purification. To purify ourselves of the karma and the 4 veils themselves requires an extremely long time, hundreds or thousands of existences, until we reach Buddhahood. And this is so wonderful to have this kind of view, because already you're making your mind vast. We have such, obsession about our life right now. Understandably, it's how we're wired. But to even hear thoughts like this, so in the, the aspiration of Samantabhadra, for instance, it's so mind-boggling. They talk about all the infinite number of Buddhas on each infinite atom. It just becomes, beyond concept, which of course is the point. To purify ourselves of the karma and the 4 veils requires an extremely long time, hundreds or thousands of existences, until we reach Buddhahood. However, if we become conscious of the problem and make great effort, purification can be accomplished in this present life. According to some texts, in the best of cases, 6 months would be enough to reach awakening. If not, then a year or one lifetime. I mean, this is just, mind-boggling. It's so helpful to understand the concepts, though, because it puts us in the proper frame of mind. We have, consequently, deep faith and reverence for Buddha mind. And then with the Great Lama, of course, that kind of confidence allows an interaction of your mind and with his or hers that can be, very productive in an ordinary way, just doing your stuff around town. There was in the Tibetan refugee community in northern India, there was one old woman who was never seen to practice. I mean, she'd outlived her family, and with the refugee status, I think she'd been cut off from extended family, but she was, she had a little tent that she was living in. And one day she passed away. And they only noticed she had passed away because there was a rainbow coming out of the tent. And everybody was like, what happened? She was never seen to practice. But there was someone who had come from her village and said, oh, yeah, but they remembered that when she was like a teenager, there was a great Dzogchen master who was just going tent to tent begging. And he had gone to their tent, and they had taken him in and apparently gotten some teachings from him. And she practiced those things without any kind of outer example. But there it was. She attained the rainbow body. So from an immediate point of view, if we seriously take up the preliminary practices, we would first accumulate enough merit and produce a sufficient amount of purification to dissipate the veil of karma significantly. That veil could be entirely eliminated, and the first stage of a bodhisattva, called perfect joy, would be attained. And that's a realized bodhisattva. So again, if you're talking about the different levels of bodhisattvahood, Lama Tarchin always talked about it. He started at 1 to 100, down here at 1 were bodhisattvas in training. That's anyone who has taken the bodhisattva vow. Then the higher levels, of course, he's talking here about reaching the first bhumi, or the level of realized bodhisattva. Okay, on the first bodhisattva stage, purification is directed to the veil of conflicting emotions, kleshas, which is suppressed totally at the 7th bodhisattva stage. So again, these 10 bhumis leading to Buddhahood, you start working on the suppression, the destruction, the evaporation of the afflictive motions on the first level. I mean, you're working on it beforehand too, of course, but in this very powerful way, this realized way, using the nature of mind on the nature of the mind, you might say. So, but they're not totally suppressed until the 7th level. So bodhisattvas beyond the 7 levels are called mahasattvas, great bodhisattvas. This is where the afflicting emotions have been they're completely gone, and then you're just working on the veils of knowledge, the way that we see things, because it said the way that the world appears to us is the residue of how we've practiced with the afflictive emotions. And when you get rid of the afflictive emotions, that's wonderful. You're not creating more, but you're still seeing what the residue, what's left. And that's this seemingly alienated kind of status, the individual existence of things as being opposed to each other. Okay. On the first bodhisattva stage, purification is directed to the veil of conflicting emotions, which is suppressed totally at the 7th bodhisattva stage. This attainment corresponds to the realization of the first 11 degrees of the Mahamudra path. From the 8th to the 10th stage, Bodhisattva stage, Mahasattva, the 3 degrees of concentration, 3 degrees of simplicity, 3 degrees of one taste, and the inferior and mediocre degrees of non-meditation purify the veil of latent conditioning. I'll go over this again. In the final superior degree of non-meditation, the veil of ignorance is dissipated, and this is Buddhahood. So again, having some knowledge of these different levels and all these teachings is very helpful, because it puts us, one, in a humble stage instead of the arrogance of sometimes people have some sort of realization, but they don't have any teachings, and they run around thinking that they're enlightened. You can have an enlightened moment, no doubt about it. You can have degrees of realization in your mind. That's a wonderful thing. But the greatness of the Dharma is that although these things can kind of happen, and even people's interest in the Dharma is like that, you're seeing something clearly, yet at the same time, you're not stopping there, because we've got the teachings on Buddhahood. So similarly, in these teachings of Mahamudra, people just think, well, I'll do Nundro, I'll do Mahamudra, everything's all the same, right? We live in this modern world, this scientific world, where nothing has any value. Everything is just data. It's like there's no hierarchy, everything. And even we're all egalitarian, we're all just wonderful. My truth. Of course, my truth is total delusion, but who cares? It's my truth. So as opposed to that, we have the Bodhisattva levels. And of course, they're mind-boggling. We had someone here when His Holiness Chetsang Rinpoche was here. One of our members asked, how will I know when I've attained the first bhumi? And he looked at her and he said, ceaseless joy, just like they just said here in this book. So if you're not experiencing ceaseless joy and you know that teaching, you're not going to fool yourself to think, oh, I'm on this level. You can drop all of that malarkey because it doesn't help anyway and just practice, but it gives you proper perspective. So now we're talking about all these 10 bhumi levels, and Mahamudra starts on the 8th level. So you've done away with all the all the afflictive emotions, and then these 4 stages of Mahamudra that Gampopa taught. Where are they? Concentration, simplicity, one taste, and non-meditation. I can't remember these teachings, but it's somewhere in one of these examples, the image that they use is a snake that's all coiled up in itself, and how easily it just completely uncoils. If you've ever seen that, you just see a snake that, I don't know, like they're mating or something, and you just get this huge, amazing ball of snakes, and it just looks like, oh my goodness. And then just, whoop, someone just undoes it. No effort at all. But importantly here, this is at this very high level. And not only that, but of these 4 degrees of Mahamudra, the final superior degree of non-meditation, the veil of ignorance is dissipated. So again, the latent conditioning, that's what I was speaking of, the residue of living with the emotions, digging, working body, speech, and mind experience through our afflictive emotions. Again, you've heard the example of a saffron box, and there's a perfumed scarf that's kept in there. Those are the afflictive emotions. And so with practice, we take out the perfumed scarf, but the smell lingers. Those are the 7th, 8th, 9th, 10th level of the Bodhisattva path. That's what you're working on there, purifying that subtle smell, that subtle residue of just the results, or not even results, residue. All right. And so this will give you a little kind of perception of the height of Mahamudra, for instance, so we won't consider it. It's so simple. This progress can be made quickly by means of the Vajrayana and Mahamudra. With the method of the ordinary Mahayana, it would take an incalculable number of lives to be accomplished. Traditionally, they say 3 ordinary kalpas.
How long is that?
Well, one example, I can't remember exactly, because there are different kalpas, and I don't know which one this refers to, but one of the examples of a kalpa is if there were a mountain a mile high made out of solid iron, and there were a deva who flew over once a century and had a little scarf that was dangling behind her and brushed the top of the mountain, the time that it would take to wear the mountain down is a kalpa.
That sounds like that's mind-boggling.
So you really start appreciating these direct methods because, my goodness, what you can save. All right. So what are the factors leading to the most rapid progression possible? They are a Lama with great compassion, deep instructions, and a disciple of superior capabilities. It is said that in this case, thanks to the instruction of Mahamudra, purification of the four veils can be immediate, like a light switched on in the darkness that is dispelled instantly. And this is mind-boggling. This is mind-boggling. And when they say a disciple, of superior capabilities, it isn't referring in a worldly way. What it means is the superior capability is this great heart of faith. And again, confidence. It doesn't mean that one has like a superior position in society or is recognized by everybody, like Leonardo da Vinci or something. Man, he could do everything. Not like that. It's this internal. And so therefore we don't see, you can't tell. But that's the quality that they're talking about superior. In Dzogchen, they talk about, the Lama has a hook, and that great faith is, maybe I got it backwards. There's an iron ring and a hook. One is the wisdom mind of the Lama. The other one is the great faith of the disciple. And, easily hook. You hook the whole thing. That's how it is. It's like instantaneous. Or the example that we get in the sutra kind of way, but still, same idea with Jigten Sumken's statement that, the Lama's mind is like a huge mountain of ice, a huge snow mountain. And the disciple's faith is like the warmth, the heat that melts the ice, and the water, the blessings flow to you automatically. You can't even get out of the way of them. It's just the way things are, flowing downhill. It's how it works. All right, so this is rather heavy stuff, and he's making it kind of dense too, at least with the words, instead of, a very simple little paragraph. He's got lots of words. So I think it's a good place to stop, and we'll just obviously pick it up next week again. But first, any questions or anything with anybody?
Yeah, I have a question. You speak about four.
He'll bring you the mic.
You were speaking of the 4 reasons to study the Mahamudra path.
Oh, that was right in the beginning, wasn't it, where they said that?
I guess so. I just couldn't remember what they were. Oh, is it right in the book then?
Well, I know I'm going to see. I know they're not listed. I think he
I wonder
referred
if you
to.
could just say them so I could just hear it.
Yeah. Well, I'm just
We could
thinking
just hear it.
where it starts out, where he says the techniques of Vipassana, concerned with the absence of forms, the absence of sensations, the absence of mind, the absence of phenomena. Is that what you're thinking of?
I think so.
Yeah. I'm not familiar with those unless they are the 4 stations of mindfulness. I think that's what he's referring to here.
And I see.
In the sutra teachings. So, for instance, if you go to if I remember, the Satipatthana Sutra, it's in the Theravada tradition, and we have it too, but it's talking about the 4 stages of mindfulness, where you start out and just being aware of the sensations of the body, then the thoughts that are arising, and then phenomena, and then mind. I think those are the 4. I'm not sure. When he said that, he said, we have this Vipassana, but then we have Mahamudra. And he went right to the Mahamudra. Okay. So everything that I was reading was about the Mahamudra, not about those 4 if those are the ones you're thinking about. But at the same time, in the Mahamudra teachings, there are these 4 degrees or 4 stages of concentration, of, I can't remember what the next one was, one taste, and then something, and then finally non-meditation. So in the end, no one's meditating at all because you're just resting in the nature of things. So if you're thinking about those 4, that's what they are. There's a teaching by Gampopa, and he's going to, I'm sure, be saying more about it because that's the actual practice. Each one of them has, of those 4, has 3 different levels: inferior, medium, and superior. Okay. So like superior concentration. And then you go to the next one, and it's like this 12 steps of Mahamudra, and all of those are within the, sorry to be so deep in the weeds with numbers, but the 7th, 8th, 9th, and 10th levels of bodhisattvahood, which is totally working on the wisdom, the jnana varanas, the obscurations of knowledge, what we see, what we know, not our afflictive emotions, but just all the stuff that's out there that we're thinking in a limited way. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
I don't know if that does it, but 4.
I think those first 4 that you
Those
said.
first 4. Yeah, I think that's what it's referring for, the four practices of mindfulness. And that's what you practice, for instance, like at what's called a Vipassana center here in the United States. They took that teaching from that one sutra, which was very much promulgated and reinterpreted really by a modern teacher in Burma, like in the early 1900s. So there was this remarkable thing that really happened because, like the rest of the third world, they were so overwhelmed by European technology and dynamism and, wealth and all of this stuff, that at sometimes some of the educated people there were like looking down on their own traditions. It was very much of a thing. And Gretchen and I were, for instance, were in India, and we were in the governmental area of New Delhi. And I heard this clip, clop, 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 clop. And here on this beautiful horse was this Indian soldier. I mean, like obviously an officer, but he looked more British than a Brit. He was probably been trained at Sandhurst, their West Point. And he just, with a British mustache, and he's right out of PBS. But what happened in the late 1900s, both in Japan and the Southeast Asian countries, is that people started rediscovering like their own culture. And there were a couple of great monks in Burma, especially, where they started going into the sutras again in a practical way, not just reading them, because it had degenerated somewhat. And that's what they came up with, these 4, I can't remember what they called, 4 stages of mindfulness, or the 4. Anyway, Satipatthana Sutra is the one, and that's the actual technique that's used. So I think what he did here in this book tonight is he says, let's talk about Mahamudra. Okay, there's these practices of mindfulness that's in the sutra teachings, but here's Mahamudra, which is neither sutra nor Vajrayana. It's like beyond, so to speak. So he said, here's what this is, but we're going to go right here. I think that's what he was doing, just giving kind of a frame of reference. Yeah.
I have a question, actually, what you were talking about last week, I believe. Is that okay?
That is okay. No limitations of mind and space, right?
I think it was last week. That the Vajrayana is shamatha and vipassana together.
Yeah.
And then in the dissolution, that's when we have this opportunity to experience the Mahamudra state, right? Am I getting that right?
Yes, but at the same time, the practice is this combination of the traditional ideas of Vipassana and shamatha together. But actually, the whole thing is Mahamudra. So whether you're you're doing it in relatives or forms, but even subtle forms, that's Mahamudra too. But the Vajrayana, that's one way that it's skillful, because for most of us, we think what we're doing is not Mahamudra. We think it's ordinary. It takes you from this state of ordinary kind of delusive conduct, action. And so we do this first, this helpful step of, we're going to work with subtle form now. already that's having us leave some of our baggage behind. And so that's one reason it's skillful, because it's like the same thing when you come to a shrine and suddenly there's, quiet, concentration, devotion. We're leaving some stuff behind. It's artificial, but of course it's helpful because we're actually closer to truth with that. So in here too, with the Vajrayana, you're suddenly going to go to subtle forms. Okay, I can't work without forms. These forms are very helpful for me because I'm just wired for form. But now I'm going to do subtle form. And it is more helpful because, again, like the gold that you visualize, you don't have any attachment to it. That's its subtle nature. Whereas ordinary gold, just because it's gross, we do. We are attached to it, and that's a veil. All right, so one, it does this second step of taking us through these whole processes. One, okay, since we, have certain kind of doubt, we don't really have total faith in this, I'm going to pretend that I'm creating the deity and all of that, and then I'm going to dissolve it because somehow, I need to dissolve it to really get to my mind because we're still so attached to form. So it's extremely skillful, but yeah, go ahead with your question.
That was just it. But also the dissolution part.
Mm-hmm.
Is there a reason it's so short? Like we meditate, right? And
Yeah.
it's usually only for,
Yes.
I don't know. It seems really short. I just was wondering, obviously there's a reason for that.
Yeah, the instruction is that when you dissolve the visualization, you remain in that, you do the step-by-step dissolution, and then it's gone, and there's like a thoughtless moment, so to speak, and you abide in that until worldly thoughts start coming up again. So that's typically short. And it's also, again, I found very skillful because it's very common to have kind of an attachment to meditation. Again, we've made this split that we think, somehow forms, they're bad, but formless, I'm good. So I want to be in meditation. But then you get attached to meditation, and the fault that they say, it's like you think that there's kind of a stability or a calmness of mind, but actually there's a big river. The Tibetans say it's going underneath the grassland. So on the surface, it's all grass, but actually there's water flowing underneath. And you're really, it's just a kind of dullness by trying to attach to formlessness. So the Vajrayana is very skillful there too, because it takes that away. And then slowly you see, well, actually this visualization, that's my mind too. And that's what I'm trying to do. So you don't lose you're not attached to one or the other. You're just doing this. And of course, underneath it all is the tremendous devotion, because you're thinking that this visualized form out there, you're the Buddha, but out there is the Lama. He's just taking that form for you, for your help. So it uses all of these kinds of, even in the sadhanas themselves, I think it's amazing how it's always kind of reminding us of the purity. It's like when you do the visualization, you are the samaya, the commitment being, but then the wisdom being shows up. And why do we have this split? Because I just can't believe that I'm the wisdom being. So we go through the Zahung Bam Ho. Okay, there they both are. So we're always doing this. It's so skillful because it recognizes that we fall from moment to moment to moment, but then provides a method that we can purify with that from moment to moment to moment. It's clearly not invented by anybody. This is just like too mind-boggling to not be true. Yeah. So, but you can meditate for as long as you want, but especially in that's the formal instruction on it. But again, with the Lama, and sometimes people have to just sort of barge through whatever they have to barge through. So if you're doing something a little bit off, as long as that basic faith there, you can go through a whole 7-day retreat or something and realize, oh gosh, I was doing it wrong. But you had to go through that to find out that I didn't need to do it that way. It's just working so hard and all of this. Somehow we have to do what we have to do.
Anything to do with letting go of nothingness into the void?
There you go.
It's just,
Yeah, right. Yes, your question.
Does that have anything to do with letting go of nothingness into the void?
Well, yeah, in a sense. Yeah, absolutely. They say it in different ways, different kind of words that give you a hint of it, so to speak, in the instruction. But absolutely. No. Okay. Anything else? Then let's do our dedication. Wonder if he has one in the book. I don't know. We dedicate the merit from this evening to all motherly sentient beings. May each and every one of us come to recognize the great truth, come to realize our true nature, and practice Mahamudra forever. Svaha. Okay. Okay. Yeah. More to come.
I won't be here next week. My band's playing at the Record Archive
Whoa.
Nice.
next Thursday.
Cool.
So
Way cool.
that should be fun.
Yeah.